Well, hi, friends. Will Davis Jr. here. Welcome to day 6, lesson 6 of conversations about the Old Testament. By the way, if you ever want to have comments or questions, send them to me at seniorpastor, srpastor@acfellowship.org. I love getting your comments. I really do. So let's get to the Bible, shall we? We've set this up. We're talking about the Old Testament. Let's get into the text. And we begin with something I spent probably the better part of 7 or 8 months teaching through not long ago, the creation account, but I'm going to do a really high drive-by on this one. We'll spend today talking about the first 2 chapters and tomorrow talking about the 3rd chapter of Genesis because they were really pivotal in setting up the whole theme of the Bible. So Moses gave us, I told you this last week in kind of the introductory comments, Moses is the one who gave us, we believe, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, called the Pentateuch or the Law, the 5. And he opens with this creation account, Genesis 1 and 2, actually 2 different creation accounts, the same creation account from 2 different angles, with 2 different players, the kind of God the sovereign God in chapter 1, God the personal God, and then God of Israel in chapter 2. Keep in mind, Moses is not writing to us in the 21st century, okay? He's writing to the people in 1300 BC, okay, and who've just been led out of Egypt and have wandered 40 years and are about to embark on this journey now of taking the promised land and reestablishing their national heritage. Israel had been a nation, and they went to Egypt out of disobedience and were taken captive for 400 years, and now they're going to come back and they're going to reestablish their national identity. But this is a whole different group of people than those that were led out of the Exodus, led out of Egypt into across the Red Sea. That whole group has died in the wilderness, so it's a whole new bunch of leaders. And Moses needs to help them understand who their God is. So while we benefit from it, understanding there's a God of creation who made everything and he's big and he's strong, this is really to identify the sovereign yet personal God of the Israelites to them and to juxtapose him to all the other pagan and false gods of the nations around them. They were about to embark in and bump into all this culture and all these religions and all this idolatry and all this child sacrifice in the name of religion. And he wanted them to know who their God was. So he introduces them to Yahweh, the creating, sovereign, holy, chapter 1 God who speaks and makes everything exist in chapter 1. And in chapter 2, he introduces them to Elohim, who's the covenant relational God of Israel. He's both. So good. So he wants them to know, look, this is who's in that cloud that's leading you every day, and that fire at night. This is who's behind that. He's the one that you gaze up at night and you see the stars. He made all that. And he made it in a very orderly, very planned, very deliberate fashion. There's nothing random about the planet you're living on. God made this. So the Israelites had been outdoors for 40 years, and they had a lot of acquaintance with nature, and he said, this is the God of all that you see. But he's also the God of right next door. And so Moses in chapters 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis gives us these 2 perspectives. One of, again, God said, let there be light. And chapter 2, God put man in a garden and established a relationship with him. And God created man and woman and marriage and all the things that God intended relationships to be. And Moses gives us a picture of both. And then as Moses moves through the creation account, as God creates the land and God separates the sea and God gives us the land animals and God gives us the fish and God gives us birds and he basically blows up all these different gods of agriculture and of nature that are around the nation of Israel where they're about to go into the promised land. Because they believed in the God of rain and the God of agriculture and the God of this and that, and they worshiped to those gods hoping to get responses. And Moses, in just one fell swoop, puts them all away and says, there's one God behind all this. There's not many gods behind this, there's one. And he's your God, Israel. He's the God who led you out of Egypt across the Red Sea, has kept you alive these 40 years in the desert, and is about to take you in and give you that land. And don't you ever get confused with the junk around you. There's only one God. What a great message, by the way, for us today. So in the creation accounts, God using Moses introduces himself or reintroduces himself to the Israelites should make sure they understand that as they now reestablish their identity as a people of God to all the world, and they get back to their land, which they lost 400 years earlier, they need to know who their God is. One of the biggest things Satan will test you with, friends, is he's going to come at you and assuming you don't know who your God is. And as these guys are about to face a whole bunch of tests, they need to know. So who is God? Well, Moses tells us. Moses tells us that God is the God of everything created. He's big, he's timeless, he's eternal. There's in the beginning, and before that there's God. And he's also the God of the covenant, the God of relationship, the God of you and me. That's who God is. How good is that? Welcome to the first 2 chapters of Genesis. Ooh, this is going to be fun. Lord, thank you for the time. Bless my viewers today. Thank you for what you've done for us. Thank you for being the covenant God and the creating God. I pray this in your name, Lord. Amen. That was fun. See you tomorrow.